It's our last Sunday in Nehemiah, folks. I know. We started Nehemiah back in September. I like Nehemiah too. He's kind of a cool guy, isn't he? I could get on with him. I could work with Nehemiah. Well, hang on. Don't spoil my thunder later in the sermon, Lids, right? So we'll just pretend Lydia didn't say that, okay? So we have reached Nehemiah chapter 7. But before we look at chapter 7, I just want us to sort of look back and take stock of where we've come from. We started back at the beginning of September in Nehemiah 1. So remember where Nehemiah comes in the Bible. I've misplaced him again. Where's he gone? Here he is. Right at the end of the Old Testament. And actually, the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, they were originally one book. Okay, so they're kind of telling the same chunk of the story. It's after the people of Israel have returned from exile in Babylon, and they're rebuilding Jerusalem. And in the book of Ezra, you hear about this guy called Zerubbabel. Again, my favourite name. I highly recommend it as a baby name for anyone who's expecting. Zerubbabel, what do we think? No, not going. Fine, whatever. Just tell my daughter, no, she's already chosen a name. And it's not Zerubbabel, so disappointment. Anywho, back to the message this morning. So Zerubbabel, he organised rebuilding the temple. Then we had Ezra came along in the mix, and he did a lot of stuff around getting people back in covenant with God, re-establishing the laws, the way that they should live under God. And then Nehemiah is the one who heard that things weren't going so great because the walls of the city, the walls of Jerusalem, had not been rebuilt. They were in disrepair. And if you remember, we started with Nehemiah. He was cupbearer to the king up north, King Artaxerxes, not king of Jerusalem of Israel, but king up north. And he heard that things weren't great in Jerusalem, that the wall was broken down. And that motivated him to come and start this big rebuilding project. But you guys have been following through the story all the way. So what are some of the key things along the story that stood out to you? What do you remember about what's happened so far that's really spoken to you? Shout some things out. How much he prayed about it, yeah. That his very starting point, when he first heard, he didn't rush off to go and start dealing with it. He prayed first. He prayed for a couple of months, I think, if I remember, didn't he? And I think Darryl last week reminded us that actually the time it took to build the wall was less time than he spent praying to start with. He spent more time praying about it than actually doing the work. I think that's challenged a lot of us. Anything else? Everyone had a job. That chapter that we so often skip through, where it basically the entire chapter goes, so-and-so and what's his name built this bit, and then Thingamy-Bob and Doodah built that bit. And we so easily skip through, but there is that beautiful picture of what it means to be God's people, of everyone coming together, doing their bit. So challenging, so encouraging. Anything else that stood out? Yeah. Yeah, the template for how to deal with conflict, because he had disagreements, didn't he? I love that we had, I think it was the week Helen preached, was where there was the distraction of the people saying, hang on, the people are not looking after each other, and there were people getting into debt and not being cared for. And that distraction he went and dealt with, didn't he? He listened and he spoke to people and he modeled how to do that. But then last week, when Darryl was speaking, it was a distraction from outside that it was like, no, actually, this is just trying to distract us from getting on with God's word, God's work. And so he didn't allow himself to get distracted by that. So that picture of how to deal with conflicts and distractions as they arise. So much we've learned. But so today, we are reaching Nehemiah chapter 7, which begins with the words, after the wall had been rebuilt. So the project, the wall, is done. It's been rebuilt. So what's going to happen now? What does Nehemiah do on completion of building the wall? And so Judy is going to come and read to us from Nehemiah chapter 7. And I've been kind to Judy, because it is one of those chapters that has a long list of very hard to pronounce names in it. But I'm going to let her stop at verse 5 before we get to that bit. So see how kind I am? Yeah? So Judy is going to read to us verses 1 to 5.
And it's page 489 in Church Bible.
Thank you so much, Judy, for reading that. So the wall is complete. The project is done. They've made it. And Nehemiah, what I see in this chapter is that he does three things. Oops. There we go. And you know it's good. I worked very hard to make sure they all started with the same letter for you. Spent ages with a thesaurus to get this. So he appoints people. He advises on what they should be doing, and then he assembles the people. He appoints, he advises, and he assembles. So let's look first at him appointing. It told us in verse 1 and 2, he assembled the gatekeepers, the musicians, and the Levites were appointed. I put in charge of Jerusalem my brother Hanani, along with Hananiah, the commander of the citadel, because he was a man of integrity and feared God more than most people do. He appointed specific people for specific tasks, and that matters. Specific people appointed for specific tasks. Let me give you an example of what happens when you don't appoint specific people for specific tasks. And we're going to go with the very godly and biblical task of doing the drying up in my house. Okay? So we're quite an organised house in our household, aren't we, darling? Absolutely. And so for many years, the kind of the arrangement, when our son Jaden was living at home with us, he's moved out to uni now, but when he's at home, his sort of job, or one of his jobs, was to do the drying up. Okay, so someone else would wash up, but his job would be to do the drying up. And he was really dutiful at it. Every evening after tea, once the washing up was done, he would dry up and put stuff away. But then he went off to university. And Chris and I failed to appoint one of us to take on the role of the drying up. So what do you think this means now happens in our house? We already had a dishwasher. This is the bits that don't fit in the dishwasher. You let it drip dry. It's not. You do get better at stacking, this is true, because when you come down for breakfast the following morning, it's all still there air drying. And then, not that, this is an issue we have, but then we get an argument, because then somebody will start doing more washing up and put the freshly washed up wet stuff on top of the stuff that's air dried. Get a bigger dishwasher with people. Because nobody is appointed to do that job, it doesn't happen. We each assume the other one's going to do it. And so perpetually, if you walked into my house right now, on our draining rack, you would find last night's stuff still drying, unless you did it after I left for church this morning, darling. No, he didn't. There we go. So you can go and check. I still love him, though. He does many other things around the house, in fairness. But isn't that the case? If nobody is appointed to a task, nobody does it. How many of you are familiar? I had to Google this one to make sure I got the little story right. How many of you could come across this thing about the four people? Everybody, somebody, anybody, and nobody. 4 different people. And there was an important job to be done. And everybody was sure that somebody would do it. Anybody could have done it, but nobody did it. Somebody got angry about that because it was everybody's job. Everybody thought that anybody could do it, but nobody realized that everybody wouldn't do it. It ended up that everybody blamed somebody when nobody did what anybody could have done. Did you manage to follow that? Just about. Isn't it true, though? We all know that truth, don't we? Yeah? That we need people who our names say, yeah, you're going to do it. It's a well-known principle, but do we apply it? We all know that. Do we live it? Do we learn from it? Do we learn from that in church? Do we in church step up and say, yep, I'll be responsible? Or do we say, well, if I'm around, I'll help out. Yeah? And I'm saying this to myself as well. How many times do you say, oh, yeah, I'll chip in. If I'm there, I'll help out. I'll get stuck in. Or do we say, okay, I will put my name down. I will be there. I will do whatever. We need people named and appointed, and we need, as the church, to step and say, yeah, I will do that. Put my name down. I will be responsible for that. But then what I love in this chapter is how Nehemiah chooses the people. So two of the key roles is the people in charge. And I love what it says about how he chooses them. He chooses one of them because he's his brother, and then Hananiah, he says, because he was a man of integrity and feared God more than most people do. He feared God. Yeah, he doesn't just say, oh, because he feared God. No, he feared God more than most people do. He was better than average. He wasn't the worst amongst them. It just tickles me that. I hope that, we perhaps aim a little higher at times when we're choosing people. We've got our church AGM this evening. Members, you'll know that. We've got a church AGM. And part of that, what happens at the AGM is that we look at our leaders and our trustees, and they reaffirm their commitment to us in their roles as church. And I hope when we choose people to be our leaders and our trustees, that we don't say, we'll have so-and-so. Where's Linda? There's Linda. We'll have Linda being on our board of trustees doing finance for us because, well, she fears God more than most of us do. I hope there's a bit more to it than that. What do we look for when we choose people, when we appoint people to positions? Yes, we look for skills, don't we? There is a need for skills. There's a need for people to have the right skills for the task. But I hope we do also look for people who fear God, for people who have integrity and are following God. Maybe we even look to the instruction given to us in Paul's letter to Timothy. Let me just quickly dig it out. He goes into a little bit more depth than Nehemiah does on choosing people to lead. Timothy says, if anyone aspires to the office of overseer, he desires a noble task. Therefore, an overseer must be above reproach, the husband of one wife, sober-minded, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not a drunkard, not violent, but gentle, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money. He must manage his own household well, with all dignity, keeping his children submissive. For if someone does not know how to manage his own household, how will he care for God's church? And so on. It matters who we appoint to those key roles, and it's not just about skill, but about godliness as well. So Nehemiah appoints those people to take on those responsibilities to ensure the ongoing good running of the city. But then he advises them. This is in verse 3. He says to them, the gates of Jerusalem are not to be opened until the sun is hot. While the gatekeepers are still on duty, have them shut the doors and bar them. I know some of us, I remember in our ladies group when we were looking at the week that described them building the walls, they made a real point of describing how they built the gates, didn't they? They said they built the gates and they put up the posts and they put the bars in place, and they made a big deal about the gates in there. Because the gates are important. If they'd just built a wall and not put any gates in it, would that have worked for a city? No. They'd have been stuck either in or out, wouldn't they? It has to have gates for things to come in and out. They needed to bring in and out people and resources. But the gates were there to keep them safe. During the day, they wanted to let the people come and go. A lot of them would have been going out to farms out in the villages to grow crops and to trade and things. But then at night, when they were vulnerable, that was when the gates were shut to keep the city safe. If we try and then apply that to us as church, well, I'm pleased to say we have doors. Our doors have locks. We even have an alarm. But it's a bit more than that, isn't it? Keeping a church safe, monitoring the ins and outs of it. That's what our trustees and our leaders do for us. Our trustees, we often don't notice the work that our trustees are doing for us as church, that keeping safe that they do. Trustees, they have responsibility for overseeing the finances of the church. They are the ones who monitor the money that's coming in and going out, deciding, is it okay for us to spend this or not? Ultimately, they're opening and closing that gate to make sure we don't go bankrupt. That's their job. But they do more than money. They're in charge of things like safeguarding and risk management and insurance. They get the joy of overseeing all of the policies. Who loves a policy? What? Oh, me and Kathy. Just me and Kathy. Excellent. But all of those things that say, actually, we have to do something this way. They weigh up the risks and say, no, we need to do things this way to ensure that we're keeping everyone safe, to ensure that we are doing things the right way. They have that legal governance over us. Ultimately, I suppose, the job of trustees is to make sure that as a church we're not breaking the law. That's pretty important. We don't want to be breaking the law. That's their job. They're gatekeepers to make sure that what we do is within the law. But they work together with our spiritual leaders, our church leadership team, who are responsible for that spiritual direction of the church. And they too are gatekeepers. They're keeping those gates of, is what we're doing, is what we're teaching actually what Jesus said? Is it biblical? Or are we making something up? Are we teaching something that's actually not what God ever said? Are we following God's call to us? Are we as church caring for and discipling each other? They open and close gates to keep those things in order. And of course, all of those different areas of gatekeeping, they overlap, they interact with each other. And so we need our trustees and our leaders working together on that. So Nehemiah advises on how they should keep Jerusalem safe. Our trustees and our leaders have that role for us as church. We keep the church safe. We open and close those gates to make sure that we're protecting what God is growing in this place. But then after he's done all of that, he says, my God put it into my heart to assemble the nobles, the officials, and the common people. Off on a little song there. He assembles everyone. He assembles all the people for registration by families. He registers, makes a list of all of the people in the city. Why do you think he does that? Quite simply, so he knows who he's got. Who belongs here? We're doing all of this gatekeeping. We're keeping the city safe, but who are we keeping safe? Who are they responsible for? Bear in mind, not everybody who belonged to that group of people actually lived in the city. There would have been plenty of people who lived out in the villages surrounding. So they wouldn't all always be there. So if they were coming under attack, they needed to know, who have we got to make sure we've brought in? Who are we protecting? They needed to know, who is it who we're expecting to live God's way, to worship at the temple, to walk this journey with us? Who are we expecting to play a role in this city? Who are we responsible for? And that same principle applies to church. One of the things we do at our AGM this evening is those of us who are church members, we renew our declarations of membership. We keep track. We have a list. I have a list on our computer of who is a member of our church. That's not because I want to say, oh, here are the special people who are the members and are superior to everybody else. or anything like that. It's not so that we can be some kind of special exclusive club. It's simply because our trustees and leaders need to know, who are we responsible for? Who are we looking after? Who do we need to notice if they're missing? You know, there's that passage, isn't there? Is it in John somewhere where it talks about the parable of the lost sheep? And if one sheep goes astray, the shepherd goes to look. Well, the shepherd needs to know which sheep belonged in his flock in the first place if he's going to go look for that one sheep, doesn't he? We need to know who we're responsible for. And that applies a bit beyond the church leadership. We, as a church, we have small groups. Every member of the church should belong to a small group. So if you're in a small group, you are responsible for the other people in your group. That's the people who belong with you. That's the people you're looking out for. That's the people that you're protecting if things get tough. We need to know who we are responsible for. We need that sense of belonging. Do I think I'm going completely off piece from my script here, but I think one of the biggest challenges in our world today, as that sense of community has broken down and people end up doing life on their own, without family, without community around them to support. And how many of you know that trying to do life on your own, you are vulnerable. If things go wrong, you've got nothing behind you. We're not meant to do life alone. We are meant to be in community with people around us. And that's part of the core of what church should be, to be that community around each other so that when things get tough, you're not on your own. You've got your church family there to walk through the tough times with you. So the wall is complete, and Nehemiah has set up Jerusalem. He's set them up. He's appointed the different roles that they need to keep things going. He's advised them on how to keep the city safe with this wall. He's assembled and worked out, okay, who belongs here? Who are we responsible for? Who are we protecting? Who are we looking after? The project is complete. We're in Nehemiah chapter 7. How many chapters in Nehemiah are there? 13. We're only halfway through. There's another 13 chapters. Now, we're sadly not continuing through all the remaining 13 chapters because we're moving on to another book of the Bible next. But I want us to notice that. The wall's done, the project's complete. But there's still another 6 chapters to go. And in fact, God's story is far from complete. Nehemiah is the very last book. Now, not in the Old Testament, because the way we arrange it has Psalms and prophets and stuff after us, but in the chronological story of the Old Testament, Nehemiah is the end of the telling of the story. It stops at the end of Nehemiah. And then there's, I think it's 400 years of silence. No scripture is written. But then the New Testament starts. And Jesus comes. Just because the project is complete doesn't mean the story is finished. Doesn't mean it's over. And in fact, Nehemiah's done a great job rebuilding the wall. They've done a great job rebuilding Jerusalem. But it all falls apart again. The temple is destroyed. The temple that Zerubbabel rebuilt gets destroyed. It doesn't stick. They have to wait for Jesus to come. And I wonder if sometimes we need to remember, we get excited about the current project, and then the project is complete. You know, everyone jumps in like they did with the wall, and everyone does their bit. Yeah, the project's complete, done. Sit back. But the work isn't finished. We've actually, as a church, we've preached through some of Nehemiah not that many years ago. Does anyone remember the last time? Can you remember when it was? Yeah, it was August 2020. I looked back in my files to find it. I last edited my last sermon notes on Nehemiah in August 2020. It was while we were still in COVID lockdown. And we did a series called Rebuild that was rooted in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah because it seemed to fit so beautifully with church having had to shut down. We'd gone online. And it was that sense of things are opening up again. We're going to be restarting church. And so we were looking to it as that inspiration for restarting church in person. Now, unfortunately, I recall my prophetic gifting was a little off, and actually we preached the series and then we were still in lockdown for a bit longer. But never mind. Eventually we did reopen and we rebuilt. And I don't know about you, but I remember that time when we came out of lockdown and we restarted church in person. That was an incredible time. Just like when Nehemiah was rebuilding the walls and everyone was coming in and doing their bit. It felt like that, didn't it? Everyone was on board. People were stepping up. We had to rebuild all of the teams because, of course, doing church online, we didn't have, a kids' work team every week. I mean, we did do a mini kids' work online, but we didn't do the full kids' work team. We didn't have a hospitality team to serve teas and coffees. You weren't allowed to for quite a while, if I remember. All of those different things had to be rebuilt. And it was amazing to see everyone come together and rebuild church. And we did. We got church happening again. Some churches really struggled coming back out of lockdown. They struggled to get going again. But I was so blessed to see how our church came back in and rebuilt. But I wonder if you, like me, sometimes feel a bit now. We did the rebuild. Yay, we got church going. And so now it's ticking over nicely. And life got busy again. Did you notice that? To start with, it was all church because we didn't have all of the other stuff going on. But then other stuff started coming in. Life got busy. And church became harder. There wasn't the same excitement, maybe. Okay, can you relate to that? Or was that just me that felt like that? We lost some of our oomph. You see, the thing is, we should never reach the point when we're building church where we feel, yep, job done. We're there. We've mastered how to do church. We've got it. Because the work isn't complete until Jesus returns. If we've got one person in our community who hasn't heard the good news about Jesus, then our job is not finished yet. If we've got one person in our church family whose spirit is broken, we're not done yet. If we've got one broken relationship amongst us, we have not finished. There is more to do. And that's only going to happen through Jesus. And I think this is perhaps where we see with Nehemiah. He did an amazing job, but it didn't stick. Because actually, in our human strength, we can't build the kingdom of God. We need Jesus. We're building towards one of my favorite passages in the Bible. I couldn't put all of it up there because there's so much, but Revelation 21. I'm not too hot on the rest of Revelation. There's a lot of wacky stuff in there that, gets a bit complicated, but this bit, Revelation 21, is speaking of the new Jerusalem. It's that picture of when Jesus returns and God makes a new heaven and a new earth. And he says, John, who's seeing this vision, says, I did not see a temple in the city because the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are its temple. The city does not need the sun or the moon to shine on it, for the glory of God gives it its light, and the Lamb is its lamp. The nations will walk by its light, and the kings of the earth will bring their splendor into it. And I love this bit. On no day will its gates ever be shut, for there will be no night there. The glory and honor of the nations will be brought into it. That's what we're building for. That's what we're building towards. And until we reach that, our work isn't done. we keep going. We keep building. We keep using all of those skills and all of that wisdom that we find in God's word to keep going, to bring the good news, to restore relationships, to heal the brokenhearted, building God's kingdom, the kingdom that ultimately Jesus himself will build. So as we draw to a close now, I'm going to ask the band to come back and lead us in worship. And I'm aware, I guess, that what we've got out of Nehemiah today, it could feel like a bit of a nag. Come on, get your act together. But this is God's call to us. This stuff matters. And our job is to hear what he is calling each of us to do. Every one of us has a part. You know, we talked about how Nehemiah appointed individuals. God has appointed every one of you to a role in his kingdom. He has appointed you to represent Jesus. How that looks, the exact playing out of what that means for each of you may look different, but he has appointed you. Will you step up? Will you follow his call? Will you do what he's called you to do and build for his kingdom here on earth? Let's invite him as we worship to challenge us, to grow us, to speak to us that this isn't me calling people, this is Jesus calling us to serve him.